People often ask me which binding I prefer for off-track backcountry skiing on cross-country skis. And there's really two choices. One is the old standard. This is the NN, Nordic norm, also called the 3-pin binding. And then there's the newer option. This is pretty much what was designed to replace the old standard. And this is the NNN, new Nordic norm. This one's the backcountry binding. Let's have a closer look at the NNNBC system. On the bottom of the boot, there's a metal bar that goes across the toe, and then they have two grooves that are cut in the sole and a ridge along here. And this matches up with the binding itself. The metal bar slides in here, and then these ridges line up with the slots cut in the sole. It allows you for a lot of stability. There's no left or right ski, so you can use any ski on either boot. Quite easy. Boot just slips in there. That locks down. I think it's a great backcountry binding. It's very sturdy. The plate offers stability. The forward bumper here gives you just about enough resistance, that forward movement. It's great for gliding along in the flats. And it also gives you good lateral stability for turns. I mean, the common myth is that this system isn't as good as the old standard for lateral stability. And you can see that this particular boot, this Alpha Scarvets, which is a pretty hefty boot, offers really good. The binding itself, the boot is well attached. And if I apply force on this boot, just like you would if you were making a turn, I can barely hold down the ski. So I think that myth is busted. I really don't think that the old Nordic norm 3-pin gives any more lateral stability than the new binding. When I hear people complain about the fact that they don't think they have good lateral stability with this particular binding, the first thing that I want to point them to is it's probably their boot and not the binding itself. And I'll show you an example. Here is a Fisher Off-Track 5 boot. It's a good boot. It's a fairly lightweight boot. And it has a lot of good forward flex. It feels really good when you're kicking along in the flats. And it has a little bit of a power strap here and gives you a little bit of control. But what it is not a good boot for making steep descents or making turns. I can hold the ski down flat to this workbench with my hand, and I can literally deform this boot from left to right. You can imagine your foot being in there with this power strap on. There's just not going to be a lot. You're not going to be able to apply a lot of lateral force to your ski with this particular boot. Let's take a closer look at the old Nordic norm. It uses a 75mm duckbill style boot. And you can see this particular boot has 3 holes in the toe. And these 3 holes match up to 3 pins that are in the binding. And there's both a left and a right ski. Essentially, you have to take the right boot and line up with the right binding. You have to get the pins lined up. And then you essentially tighten this bail down. And that essentially locks the toe of the boot to the ski. And it's a really good system. The only real downside is that sometimes it's difficult to get the pins lined up with the boot, and if you don't do that properly, then you can end up messing up the toe of your shoe. Another complaint with this particular setup is what's often called the boot squeak. And oftentimes they'll squeak and they'll squeak and they'll squeak. They can get to be a little annoying. I don't think that the toe of the boot is held any better by this particular binding than it is with the new Nordic norm. In fact, you might even argue that the new Nordic norm binding holds the toe of the boot in a much more rigid and stiff position for lateral movement than the old binding. And as I move the back of the boot here, you can see there's considerable lateral movement. Now that's not necessarily a bad thing. I'm just oftentimes I hear people say that you can apply more lateral pressure with the old style binding than you can with the new, and I just don't think that's true at all. I think the amount of lateral pressure that you can put on the ski is more dependent upon the boot than it is upon the difference between the two bindings. This is my heaviest synthetic boot. You can see you can get a lot of sideward pressure. It's due mostly to the makeup of the boot itself. Look at the movement of the toes. There's a little bit of slop up in here, and even though this is a fairly new boot and a fairly new binding, there has to be a little bit of gap between the duckbill and the binding itself. And that little bit of gap allows a little bit of play. So you can see that there is a little bit of play in this boot, and you just don't see the play in the toe of the boot here. Let's come around and look at the backside. Now I'm applying lateral movement to the ski. You can see how much the heel moves from left to right. This is the Nordic Norm 3-pin binding on the left. And here's the same movement on the NNNBC binding. Let's see how they feel in the forward flex. No, they have a different feel. The NNN seems to be more uniform in the resistance to that forward flex. When it comes to weight, the standard version of the 3-pin binding is actually a little bit lighter than the NNNBC binding. But as soon as you start throwing riser plates on it and heel risers and wires and cables, this binding will tend to be a lot heavier than this setup. So if the NNNBC offers just as good a lateral stability as a traditional 3-pin binding, why do I choose it as my personal preference? And I think the main reason is for flexibility. With the 3-pin binding, you have the option to have a riser, and when you put skins on your skis and you're going up a fairly steep hill, that riser just makes it so much easier on the calf muscles. You also have the ability to use the binding with a set of cables or hardwire, give you a little bit more support on the boot for the downhill run. And they're both attachable and detachable. Those options just aren't available on the NNNBC. If you're skiing terrain that is more gentle, you can use a synthetic boot. It's a nice light setup, very comfortable. And if you happen to be skiing much more aggressive, much more difficult terrain, you can pair it with a real top-notch plastic boot. And you all use all those different combinations with the same set of skis. And when you're using the NNNBC boot, even though you can have lightweight boots and you can have heavier boots, you just don't have as many options as you do with the traditional 3-pin. With the NNNBC binding, most of the boots that are available, at least here in the United States, tend to be on the softer side, and they tend to be more suitable for more rolling terrain. And you have to search to get a much heavier duty boot, one that you can use for steeper terrain and more aggressive terrain, the kind of boot that gives you lateral support.